Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Adam. Welcome back to another film discussion. And in this episode, I want to talk all about Sony's Superbit line of DVD releases that came out between 2001 and 2005. There's about 100 titles released globally. Different regions had different titles, and Sony were saying that they were clearer, they were sharper, more detailed picture over their standard releases. And the catalog was made up of mainly older releases as well as some current releases. Now, I heard about this in magazines that I was reading at the time, DVD Review, Empire. I saw them advertised, but I never got into buying them, to be honest. I had a lot of the catalog titles that were coming out already with loads of extras, and Superbit DVDs don't have any extras, and they were roughly about £15 more expensive. So there was nothing really pushing me to go and get that and replace the versions I had. Some people did buy them, and when the internet came out, there were forums and people were saying they couldn't actually tell a difference between Superbit and the standard release. And recently I found a website that was saying that Sony was actually degrading the quality on the video side of their standard releases to make the Superbit seem more superior. Now, in this day and age of Blu-ray and 4K, this whole topic is moot because you can find these films in much higher quality now on those formats. But I think it's an interesting controversy and discussion. And now that I have a 4K OLED 65-inch, TV with a video scaler that actually makes DVDs look really good, like almost Blu-ray quality, I thought I'd go back to these Superbits and try a few and see what the whole thing was all about. Were they indeed a true con and Sony double dipping to get people to buy more films, or were they legit in what they claim that they did have superior video on them? So I went out and I got about 8 different Superbit titles ranging from early release to about 2003. And I've basically gone through the lot and noted their bit rates and checked over the video quality. And now a lot of these films I've had on DVD myself, especially Godzilla. I do truly remember Godzilla having that on DVD, and I've also got the bit rate for all the standard release films. Now, I've also gone out and sourced a few films on DVD that were released around the same time as these Superbits and the standard versions that comparatively are the same in length and have the same kind of amount of extras. And I've noted all the bit rates on these discs as well, to compare them with the standard release to see if Sony were indeed degrading the standard release one so Superbit would seem superior. So we're going to compare all of this first, but before we do, I think it's only fair that we actually have a discussion first about DVD and understand what that format is, and then we will be able to find the true difference between Superbit and DVD. So a DVD is basically a digital video format. It's when it first came out, it was 4.7 gigs in size, a single layer disc of storage space. It was the resolution was 720 by 480 in the NTSC region and 720 by 576 in the PAL region. Now, the way that these DVDs were made in the early sort of release, which was like the mid to late 90s, was actually kind of the same way a Laserdisc would be made. You'd have a 35mm negative or print, and that would be basically transcoded into a DVD using a magnetic tape master, which would, like, the negative or the print would be scanned at 1000 lines per frame, and then it would be transcoded into the DVD. And on first release, a lot of the studios, like nearly all the studios, jumped on board, but most of them were creating what was called flipper discs. So you'd have half the film on one side like a Laserdisc and then have to flip it over to the other side. So you'd get kind of like two sided 4.7 gigs of data. And yeah, there was a lot of like compression artifacts and a lot of like color banding, contrast ringing on these early releases, and literally every studio was creating DVDs. In fact, a lot of studios who had already released films on Laserdisc were porting over the extras as well to be put on these early release DVDs. Now, a Superbit DVD, okay, and a standard regular DVD, both are effectively DVDs. So they both must conform to the specification of DVD in order for a DVD player to recognize it and play it back on your monitor. And to be honest, like myself, back when Superbit was coming out, I had a CRT 32-inch TV. So, like, one of the reasons why I didn't buy them is probably because I wouldn't have seen the difference. I think most everybody back in the early 2000s had a CRT TV, which has a line resolution of 480. Now, when Superbit was released in the early 2000s, the way of taking and mastering a print to DVD was slightly different, and I'm going to cover a DVD series in the future in a totally separate video and go a lot more into detail in that process. But the basic way it's done, it's a conversion process, because at the end of the day, a DVD is a digital video format, just like Blu-ray and just like 4K. And with digital video during the conversion, there are just side effects that you can't get around. There is digital artifacts that you will have in your translation from analog 35mm to digital DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. And these artifacts can be basically, like I mentioned, contrast ringing, color banding, pixelation, if there's not enough bits per frame, and just like a whole host of other things. And it's just the nature of the beast, really. Now, like I said, just when Superbit was coming out, the process of mastering had changed. They were now scanning, using a new machine, the negatives or the prints at 2000 lines of resolution per frame. And that would all then be stored, instead of on a magnetic tape master, an actual PC hard drive as a transcode stream, so a digital file, 2K file basically, or files, and these would be like over 100 gig in size. It would be a lot more detailed than the previous way of doing it. As the DVD evolution also happened, dual layered discs came out, so you could get 8.5 gigs of data instead of 4.7, and nearly all the studios use 8.5 for the film as standard now. And the way that DVDs are created as of 2025, and they still are made for current films, the process is a lot more refined and a lot better. And there is less digital artifacts, you know, when you compare it to a early release video. So how do you get a transport stream that is over 100 gig in size down to a 8.5 gigabyte single disc DVD? Well, basically it's video compression using the MPEG-2 video codec, which was actually co-created by Sony themselves. And basically part of the conversion, obviously you're scaling down the resolution from 2K to 720 lines by 480 lines of resolution. Each line, and vertically and laterally, is basically a pixel. So you got 720 pixels by 480 pixels, but that's not going to reduce the file size enough to fit on a disc. The DVD specifications, the maximum bit rate a DVD can have is 10 megabits per second. So what's like the megabit, and how does all that work out? Well, basically each frame of the film is analyzed, and only the differences between each frame is assigned a bit. So the more that the scene or the frame changes from frame to frame, the more bits are needed to record that data down to the final end product. And it would be a VOB file that could then be burned onto the disc. So if you have a film that's heavy in action with a lot of things changing scene to scene, that's going to require more bits to copy all that information into the final destination. Or if you have a film which has a static camera and not much is changing, say like Dances with Wolves, there's a lot of vista open panoramic shots there where it's just like, and not much is changing, then that's going to require less bits to copy the information off from frame to frame. Now, by copying the information from frame to frame, the differences between the frames rather, like I said, it assigns it by a bit. So over the course of a film, which, you know, films have different run times, you're going to have a bit rate that's going to be going up and down depending on the scene, and a computer would be scanning these frames on the PC to be able to determine what is changing and how many bits are needed in any given scene. Now, on a regular release DVD, the average bit rate is between 3 to 5.5 bits per second on a dual layer disc, because at the end of the day it needs to fit on an 8.5 gigabyte disc, but it's not the only thing on that disc. There is multiple language tracks that are available, the audio. There is also the native audio that you're going to be listening it to in. There are animated menus which will take up space. Sometimes you'll get documentaries, deleted scenes, theatrical trailers, even pre-roll trailers advertising other either theatrical or DVD releases at the time. There's just a whole host of other items that all share that same space. So the film must fit in within that. On average, a film will take up between 3 and 6 gig in space on that DVD disc, sharing it with all the other stuff. And one way to get a file that is over 100 gigabytes in size down to say 5 gig in its destination, there is a whole calculation that's done by the resolution and calculating that against the runtime of the film and the destination size that you want to have. The computer comes up with a bitrate sort of window and then will dynamically assign the bits to each frame to copy across the information it needs. And the more bits that you can assign to a frame, the more of the movie you're copying across and the less of the digital artifacts you'll see. The less bit rate that is used, you're getting less of the film being copied and you'll see more digital artifacts. And that's just kind of the nature of video compression. Now, on Blu-ray and 4K, it is the exact same process, but because those storage mediums are much, much higher, you can actually copy across more bits, most likely, especially in 4K, the full frame, to be recorded onto these discs and get no video digital artifacts on those mediums when you compare it to DVD, which has a 5 gigabyte destination size. Then less can be copied across and you'll see more of these artifacts. Now, at the end of the day, the resolution 720 by 480, all the TVs at the time were 480 lines of resolution, so the format of DVD was specific to the monitor display at the time, and you did not notice any of these sort of artifacts when you played the movie back because the resolution matched the display. But if you go watch a DVD on a 1080p display or even a 4K display, now you're upscaling the image beyond its own resolution, and with digital it tends to just go blocky, the bigger it gets. And it's not like when you project an image, when you project analog or when you blow analog up, it just gets blurrier and blurrier the bigger you go, and that's it. But with digital encoding, when you blow it up beyond its resolution, it just gets blockier and blockier. As you're expanding these pixels, you begin to see the actual pixel itself as it blocks, as it gets bigger. So a lot more people around the time the internet broke, which was like 2004 in Britain, had HD ready TVs or HD TVs, and now could actually see DVDs as blocky and raw. But that didn't really matter because in 2006 Blu-rays came out which perfectly matched the display resolution of a 1080p monitor or TV, and they were now the winning format of the time, and DVDs went bye-bye. So really a DVD, when you compare it to the other formats, is really quite restrictive. But the bit rate is super important, because the more bits you're copying across, the more of the movie you're actually seeing, and the less digital artifacts. So if anything, the true nature of a Superbit, as Sony claims, is that they have a higher bit rate, because on a Superbit disc, it's just a one disc. Although, you know, later on in the series they were deluxe 2 discs, where you had the film and then all the special features, but they were even like another tenner on top of the Superbit price. But on this 8.5 gigabyte disc, you have just the movie, and that is it. So the movie has the full disc capacity, which means it can have an increase in bit rate. So in theory, these should be better quality. But how come people couldn't tell the difference then between a Superbit and a standard DVD? Well, it's really about 2 factors, really. At the time Superbits came out, it was 2002, and CRT TVs were still in the mainstream, and they are 480, just like the DVD specification itself. So really, it's perfect match for match. And the way a CRT showcases color is completely different to the way a digital TV showcases color. In fact, CRT TVs have a better color reproduction. So DVDs actually did look fine, but the master for, say, Godzilla, and comparing it against, because I remember having this when it first came out on standard DVD. It had loads of extras with it. It had like 3 language tracks, and it had a commentary and the film. And I honestly thought that the film was really good quality, although I see it on a CRT TV. But I honestly thought it was a really good, like, encode. Comparatively thinking about it, all those extras as well, the film itself is only about 3 to 5 gig in size. But it was actually a really good encode. Now, on the Superbit, where it's going to have at least 6 to 7 gig, that's double the size, meaning it can have almost double the bit rate. In fact, Godzilla, the original bit rate on the standard definition, was between 3.5 to 5 megabits per second. The Superbit bit rate on this disc is between 4 and 9.5 megabits per second. So yes, there is more of the film being copied across. But the reason I think people couldn't really tell the difference is because both the standard def version of Godzilla and the Superbit version of Godzilla, they stem from the same master, you know. And so the same amount of detail and resolution is being copied across. So therefore, you're not seeing any more detail. You're not seeing bolder colors. You know, it's the same info being carried across. All you're seeing is less compression artifacts, and that is it. But if you're on a CRT TV monitor, you're probably not really going to see those artifacts anyway. You know, so that's probably why people could not tell the difference. Yes, I think that the Superbit picture is sharper, is more clearer, and has a better encode over its standard def, counterpart. But back in the day of 2002, I don't think anybody could tell the difference really between those. Now, let's talk about the controversy of, you know, lowering their quality of the standard releases. So I've got a load of films here. Criterion, Disney, the studios basically who were releasing these. So the average bit rate on these discs, and you know, some of these got like quite a few extras on them, is between 3.5 and 5.5 megabits on average. Some are a little bit higher, some are a little bit lower, but on average 3.5 to 5.5 megabits per second. And the size of the files on these discs is between 4 and 6 gig. So when I look at the bit rate on the standard definition, so let's go through them. So Gattaca its standard definition bitrate is between 3 and 5 megabits per second, whereas the Superbit bitrate is between 4 and 9. So it is higher, it has more bits, and 3 to 5 on the standard release is the same as all the other studios at the same time. The Patriot, its standard bitrate was around 4.5 to 6.5, but on the Superbit it's between 6 and 9, so a lot more. And I believe this is quite a long film. The Mask of Zorro early release, the standard bitrate for the Mask of Zorro was between 2.5 to 4.45, whereas the Superbit is between 4 and 8.5. So yes, you know, so far all these bit rates are kind of matching up to what the average bit rate was of the standard release. And to be honest, for all of these, it is pretty much the same. Panic Room, the initial release was 3 to 6 bits per second, whereas this Superbit is between 4 and 8. It's not much of an upgrade, but it is an upgrade, and there are a lot of static shots in this film. There's not much that changes scene to scene. It is a very paced film, a thriller, and so I imagine that the bitrate could have been higher anyway on its standard release. Das Boot is a film I actually haven't seen yet, but its standard release bitrate was between 4 and 6 megabits per second, whereas on this version, which is actually, I believe, a deluxe version, so it's got the 2 discs, this is between 6 and 8, so that is definitely a small improvement. The film Vampires, the standard release was between 3 and 6 megabits per second, and this one is between 6 and 9. So the highest bitrate on its standard release is the lowest bitrate on the Superbit version. And finally, Hannibal, a very long film full of static camera shots. The original bitrate was between 3 to 5.5 megabits per second, and this one is between 6 and 9 megabits per second. Now, so in terms of tech talk, the bitrate on the Superbits does definitely exceed the standard release versions for sure. And the standard release versions does match around the same kind of bitrate that other studios were doing at the time. I think this whole kind of I couldn't tell the difference really comes from, at the time, CRT TVs, you're not really going to see much of a difference, I think. Might seem a little bit sharper on the Superbit, but that is it. But I think what people were looking for was seeing more detail. They were thinking they were going to see, you know, a better transfer onto a disc rather than just a sharper original, you know, master, which is all it really is. And then obviously as the TVs got bigger, then people could probably see a little bit more of a difference, but in all honesty, it would be full of noise of, you know, digital artifacts. And on the Superbit ones, you wouldn't see as much. You know, you'd still see the same kind of color, the same black level, the same white level. You know, the only film that really changed its color was The Fifth Element, where the original DVD release had been given this warm tone to it for whatever reason, and when they did the Superbit version, they unwarmed it back to what the original negative was, so it had this cooler and color look. And that's probably the only difference in the entire series catalogue of films that did actually visually change. But all for all of the films, the only change was less digital artifacts. So you'll only notice this on bigger TVs. And I gotta say, I scanned through every one of these films on my 4K 65-inch with the video processor scaling this 480 image up to 4K, and I gotta say, I didn't really see that many digital artifacts. It is a very sharp picture, and I probably would say Panic Room out of all of them stands out. It almost looks like a Blu-ray. Like, I am super happy with the Superbit series, and I can definitively say 100% it wasn't a con. They were legitly an upgrade. They were also from most likely a 2K Master, as opposed to the other releases, although they could have been from a 2K Master as well. The technique of scanning the negative or the 35mm print in 2K had changed around about 1997 to 1998, I believe. So a lot of these films originally did come from that time anyway, so the originals probably were from a 2K Master. But those early wave release DVDs, they actually came from the same master as a Laserdisc, and so they were really bad, you know, when you compare it to what you get today. So I imagine people were looking at these first wave of discs from Sony and Columbia TriStar. They were the only studios involved because this was a Sony thing, and they were looking that these are shockingly crap. And they're talking from a perspective of further down the line when we have dual layered discs, and you know, no longer is anybody using a single layered disc for a DVD. They're using dual layered discs and going, well, all these Sony ones are really single layered and, you know, look rubbish when you compare it to other studios. I think it's just a misconception that Superbit was rubbish. It wasn't. It was legit, and it is a better picture. Now, the one thing that I don't see anybody talking about in any of the forums about Superbit is the audio. Now, obviously, on a Superbit, you get the film, but the audio options, all the multi-languages have been stripped out, except for on this title, you have both English and German. But on every Superbit release, you had two choices of audio options. You had a Dolby Digital 5.1 track, and you had a DTS 6 track. And so those who would want to listen to either, now at the end of the day, like, it's DVD, so both formats were heavily compressed when you compare it to the less compressed Laserdisc version, or the uncompressed 4K version, or the hardly compressed Blu-ray version. These are heavily compressed, and so the difference between the two is probably only that the DTS one sounds a little bit better in the rears or is a little bit louder. But other than that, you had the option on every release a DTS track. I don't know if Das Boot or like other titles in this series got a DTS release anywhere else, like until maybe 4K or later on in Blu-ray. But this has the original German in 5.1, as well as an English surround in Dolby Digital and the Dolby DTS in German as well. So it's got the original language and then a dubbed version. So I'd probably listen to the dubbed version because I don't really want to read subtitles, and I'm sure the actors who did the dubbing did well. But I mean, I probably will check out both. But I'm really looking forward to watching this because I've never seen it, you know. But Superbit was legit, guys. Okay, there are just about 100 titles worldwide, lots of films. I'm probably going to get a few more. I actually do prefer watching a Superbit over a standard release, but I don't really like the fact that they don't come with any extras, because I am a bit of an extra whore. I do like that. But let me know in the comments what your thoughts were on Superbit at the time and now after watching this video and understanding the difference between DVD, the history of it, and Superbit as well. And I'm going to be coming back with more discussions in the future. I've got a whole series that Disney produced called the Vista series. That's coming soon, as well as, you know, single reviews, which for all of these films I will do a single review on in the future. So thank you so much for watching this. Don't forget, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Goodbye.